welcome. Glad everybody's here. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us to attend today's webinar on the power of one. We've got a great hour ahead for you. Change management is a topic high on a lot of people's agendas, especially anybody experiencing change or leading their organization through change. So today you'll hear from change management expert Brenda Robinson on how one voice can derail or champion your project, how the power of one played out in a real world scenario, and what you can do to get the power of one working for you. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Melissa Prusher. I'm Vice President of Marketing at Avaap, and am delighted to welcome you and have you here with us today. Brenda will tell you more about her background when she takes over, but you should know that she's an accomplished change management professional and lean business leader with experience across a range of industries, from higher education and public sector to healthcare, retail, and others. She brings a wealth of experience in helping organizations achieve transformation through change management strategies and operationalizing change. We'll get to today's session in a minute, but before we do, wanted to just cover a quick housekeeping item. Most of us are familiar with Zoom. At the bottom is a Q&A button, bottom of your screen, so you can feel free to submit questions at any time during the webinar, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end or in real time if we can. You'll also see at the end of today's session a brief survey, and I would greatly appreciate if you could take a couple minutes, maybe even less than a minute, to complete it before you exit. One other thing, because we always get asked, an on-demand version of today's webinar will be available on our website in approximately 2 business days, and everyone who's on today's call will also receive an email with a link to view the webcast on demand. As many of you know, Avaap is an industry-focused cross-platform management and technology consulting firm specializing in enterprise applications, data analytics, and change management. We have more than 400 certified consultants, are headquartered in Columbus, Ohio, and have a local presence throughout the United States. Our team has deep expertise in ERP cloud implementations across all the leading platforms, in addition to our independent and objective advisory services that offer great value to any organization in the selection stage seeking to do more with their data or seamlessly navigate through change. Our market-leading change management practice is a team of dedicated change practitioners who focus exclusively on helping our customers with organizational change management, organizational design, building change capability, and increasing ongoing adoption to reach their goals. If at the end of today's session, you realize you'd like to connect to talk specifically about a project at your institution, we'll put our contact information up on the screen at the end, and happy to have a more personalized conversation. But for now, sit back, get comfortable, get ready to learn, and together we'll welcome Brenda Robinson. Brenda, this is your show from here. Amy, go ahead, click the slide, and we're on our way.
Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate it. And I am so excited to have you all joining us today to talk about the power of one. I'm Brenda Robinson, Principal Consultant with Avaap. I have experience across multiple industries, including government, education, healthcare, and manufacturing. And I have a really broad base of experience spanning from finance and accounting to strategic planning to supply chain management, consulting, and change management. So with that, we'll move on to the next slide to talk about why we are here. So today, we are here to talk about the power of one. So the power of one is a phrase that I coined based on an experience I had with a healthcare project in Ohio. So we're going to talk about what that means. What is the power of one? I'm going to share my definition. It's probably not something that you can Google and find that will align with what we're going to talk about today, but I'll share my definition. Share the project that really brought life to the concept of the power of one and some of the key challenges that we face that drove the realization that the power of one is real, it exists, and there are some things that we need to look out for and engage in order to manage that. So we'll talk about that project, key challenges. We're going to give you some characteristics of what you need to look for to identify the power of one in your organization. I'll share some of the factors that drive and empower the power of one. So what makes them do what they do and why are they doing it? We'll talk about the impact that we experience during the project. of the Power of One, share some results and then some lessons learned and how that has actually helped us move this project from being very difficult initially to great success at the end. So next slide, please. So what is the power of one? So this is my definition of the power of one. Next slide, please. So it is the power, the passion, influence, and persuasion used by an individual to manipulate a situation toward a desired outcome. So how does that happen? It starts with a personal agenda. So there are some things that individuals feel really strongly about, and they're willing to align others as well as themselves behind that. It's fueled by individual beliefs. These are my beliefs. I'm really strong about it, and I'm going to state my case. And seeded through campaign style application. So think about the politician in your local community. Elections are coming up. So what do? You have this one individual come out and he talks to people on the street. He goes to the community center and talk to the folks there, talk to the people in the church, and eventually he's blanketing the community, the entire community, in order to persuade them to vote for them. So it is a very similar situation here with the power of one. So as we walk through this, I'm going to break down this experience so that you can have some takeaways, things you need to look out for, and maybe give you some thoughts around and some tools and ideas that you can use to help identify and leverage the power of one in your organization. So next slide, please. So what is the power of one? A single voice can be a powerful force to influence and command the attention of others. Now, I'm probably going to date myself here, but when I was younger, there was a commercial that said, when E.F. Hutton speaks, everybody listens. And this is truly the essence of the power of one. So E.F. Hutton could be the physician that I'm going to talk about. We'll call her Dr. Jane for this webinar, but it could be someone else in your organization. So they command the attention of others. Now, that could be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. They could be a catalyst for change, or they could be the cause of obstruction and delays in a project or business initiative. So think about that as we move forward. The power of one, a single voice, the manipulation, passion, and purpose that they use to manipulate a situation to a desired outcome. So next slide, please. So how does that work? So in the real world, the project that we're going to align with today is around a healthcare implementation. So next slide, please. So this project was a medium-sized healthcare organization in Ohio. We were working on transforming how care was delivered across 14 ambulatory health centers and various specialties. It was a 2-year process to improve the overall patient care or the patient experience from the point of scheduling an appointment to completing that appointment. One of the objectives was to make sure that all the medical practitioners, our physicians, nurses, and specialists are all working within the scope of their license, but also that the support staff was doing what they were supposed to do as prescribed by their job descriptions, as well as the needs of the health centers. So again, improve the end-to-end patient experience, focus on quality of care, and increase the overall patient satisfaction. Now that kind of lays the groundwork. So let me give you a little bit of background of why this project was necessary. So the healthcare system was experiencing financial distress. So their objective was to go through a transformation to not only improve revenue, but grow the organization. So that required changing healthcare delivery end to end, from scheduling to completion of the appointment. So through this process, we looked at 4 main categories. We looked at the schedules for the physicians. We looked at demand operations. So where are the patients going? Which health centers is the demand happening in? We looked at the staffing model. So do we have the right people at the right place to support the patient demand? And then we looked at the overall management of the health centers. Are they running as efficient as they should? And there were several challenges that came out of this as we started to move forward with the process. So 4 key challenges. To begin with, the perception of the medical staff was that The administrators focused too much on profitability and financial results and not on improving the care delivery. The medical staff felt that they did not have enough say in it, in the project, enough decision making. So there was a lot of friction and distrust between administrators and the medical staff. Think of that us versus them mentality. So underrepresentation and lack of decision making was a big deal as well for the medical staff. When you look at the leadership of the overall health system, there was only one physician leader in the C-suite, and that was the chief medical officer. So when you think about a health system, where does the revenue come from and who generates it? It's generated by the physicians who's actually in the room visiting the patients. Every other position, every other job, every other role is there to support the physicians. They are the heart and soul of a healthcare system. So these challenges, the misalignment of focus, the first bullet, and the second one, that history of distrust and that lack of decision-making authority is what's really going to drive the power of one. So that kind of lays the foundation for the conversations, the actions, and activities that happen moving forward. Again, the focus was, for the project, increase revenue, improve the patient experience. And by the way, the medical staff is saying, okay, we like that, but you still have to focus on the quality of care. So let's move to the next slide, please. So what does the power of one look like? So to go back to my earlier statement, when E.F. Hutton speaks, everybody listens. That one voice, that lone voice can start a conversation and create a movement. So let's explore some of the characteristics to look for. If you're looking inside your own organization, you want to look for the influencers. That's what we call them on Instagram, right? So who are the influencers and what is the depth and breadth of that influence? In this situation, Dr. Jane was a previous president of the medical staff, so she was well connected across the entire health system. So she had the respect of the medical staff. She had the support of the medical staff. She wasn't really in a title position once she left the president role, but she had established herself as a leader. So when you're looking for the position, so you've got the influence and you're looking for the position, don't always focus on that title position, because there are other positions in the organization that carry almost as much weight as the person with the title. So are they likable and respected? Dr. Jane was well respected, and she was one of those people, when she spoke, everybody listened. And the other thing that made Dr. Jane very unique is her desire to stand before the leadership team in support of the medical staff when nobody else would do it. So she was certainly the voice of her constituent. If there were issues that bubbled up from the medical staff and they felt that they weren't being heard, Dr. Jane was up front in front of the leadership team having those conversations. Now, were the conversations well received? We'll talk about that later. But she was also very passionate. She's a physician. She strongly supports patient care because she wants to make sure that we're given the best care possible. And her whole focus of aligning is to make sure that we put the patient first and revenue and financial results second, because without that focus on the patient, there is no revenue. So influence, position, not always a position, a title position, but a position of influence or a position of power, likable and respected, willing to be a voice for their constituents, and passion and purpose. And that's what drove her. So let's move to the next slide, please. And let's dive in a little bit deeper to talk about things that empower the power of one. So there are several factors. Fractured relationships. Just think about in your organization or even in your family, right? There's always one vocal. My sister is the most vocal person in my family, and she refuses to not be heard. So we have that in our family. But think about those relationships where that voice is not heard, okay? When you're not focusing and spending the time to build those relationships and creating that collaborative environment. So again, going back to what I said earlier, there was that distrust between the medical staff and the administrator. So it fractured those relationships. Next, please. The lack of stakeholder engagement. So when you're not communicating, when you're not aligned on your objectives and what you're aiming for, sometimes it's very hard to engage with people. When you're not talking to me and I'm not understanding what the purpose or the goals are, it's hard for me to engage. So standing aside, the medical staff did not engage because they weren't getting the responses that they needed. Next, please. Feeling of loss of control. Through this project, we went through several iterations looking at physician schedules. We looked at the staffing, we looked at demand, and we looked at how do we manage our staff across the spectrum of the health center. And let me talk a little bit about where that feeling of loss of control is coming from. One of the biggest things that the physician had before this project was implemented was full autonomy around the management of their schedule. So they would say which patients go into which slot, how much time was being utilized for those particular patients, and what type of service they would receive doing that. The other piece of their concern was now the physicians are being asked to work across multiple health centers as opposed to the one health center that they've reported to year after year, and they're comfortable there. They know their care team, they know what to expect, they know what exam rooms they're going to be functioning in, they understand how the clinic flows. So now they're being pulled out of their comfort zone and they're being asked to work across multiple locations. So now they're being told you're going to become a mobile workforce. So that was a sticking point for the physician body. Next, please. Misalignment. So let's talk about that. You heard me mention that there was this friction between the medical staff and administration, a feeling that the medical staff did not have enough decision-making authority around how care was delivered within the health system. So, and then there was the idea that administrators were only concerned about revenue, whereas the physicians are focused on the quality of care that's being delivered. Next, please. And then dismissing those concerns. So how does this empower the power of one? So I'm going to break this down for you. Because the medical staff were so accustomed to the doctor, to the physician, Dr. Jane being that voice, they stopped listening to her. So she was the advocate for any concerns that came forth from the medical staff, whether it was in her previous position as the president of the medical staff or in her current position where she was just a colleague. She was always that strong voice. And it started as a singular voice. But no matter how many times she came forward, while they listened, they did not hear her. So she started having conversations with physicians in her health center. Let's talk about the project. Help me understand your concerns. Help me understand how we can influence the project team to make changes to address the concerns that we have in front of us. So she started a conversation within her health center. Then the word got out that Dr. Jane was going to advocate for this and push for changes to how we were rolling out the project. So the one voice became a few voices with the physicians within her health center. After the word got out, she started meeting with the physicians from other health centers. So one voice, a few voices, now a few meetings. Those meetings then turned into the full medical staff supporting her. So the power of one single voice with a lot of influence, great reach across the organization, well respected, willing to be that voice of that constituent, started a conversation and created a movement within the organization. So some of the things that we did that drove that empowerment was from her was we didn't carefully listen to what she was saying because the administrators had heard her enough. They said, well, we're moving forward. Don't listen, that's just noise. She's always on a platform about something or the other. We're going to continue to move forward. What did that do? That constant dismissal do? Fractured those relationships. So now we don't have the opportunity to properly align on the objectives because we're not giving them a platform to share their concerns. Now we had project positions on the team, but they really weren't in decision-making roles, which is what they desired. They were really support roles. So there wasn't that engagement. And then again, back to that feeling of loss of control of their schedule. So what did Dr. Jane do? So she started a campaign, one-on-one sessions with individual doctors, group meetings, to the point where she had the full medical staff behind her. So let's move to the next slide and explore the implication of that. So I'm going to go through this. While this says leveraging the power of one, I'm going to talk about some of the things that we did not do in each of these areas. And then I'm going to circle back to how you can leverage the power of one to advance on a more collaborative way. So listen to what's being said. Because the administrators had heard her so often come forth, she was considered noise. But beneath all of that noise, there were some real concerns going on. And while the medical staff always talked about it in terms of quality of care, they were looking at from the big picture. What we as a project team missed was everything that was behind that noise, the real reasons, which was the loss of control of their schedule and having to work across multiple clinics. So through some of the sessions, I started to understand where she was coming from. And I will give you an example. Every month we would do 2 project team updates with the medical staff. So project team members as well as administrators would get before the entire medical staff and provide project updates of what's going on. And those updates were always so rosy. They were always so perfect. And during one of those sessions, I was sitting in a good position where I can see the entire room. And because a lot of the noise that I was hearing surrounded Dr. Jane, I started to watch her. And what I realized was she was commanding that room. She owned that meeting, whereas the project team thought they didn't, she did. So what did she do to own that room? She started to have pre-meetings because we would send the update agenda out in advance to make sure the medical staff was aware of what was going to be talked about. So she would take the agenda, pull specific positions in for each of the meetings and have them address it. So they would practice the questions, anticipate the answers, come back with rebuttals, and work through that entire process. So I watched it the first time during one meeting, and I noticed her. She would nod to a physician, and that physician would ask a question. If he got the answer that he wanted, she would nod to the next person, and then the next person, and the next person. And I thought that was really interesting the first time. So when I saw it the second and third time, I realized we had a problem. And the problem was she did a better job of aligning the medical staff behind her cause than we did aligning them behind the purpose of the project. So what did I do? I started to circle back and talk to the physicians that she was talking to. So I started to go back and have those one-on-one conversations. Now, initially, we did our baseline assessments to try to understand what was going on. And we did a sample of interviews with the physician bodies. But, you know, she knew something that we didn't. Because she was so well connected, she knew who the biggest influencers were in the medical staff, and she got them squarely behind her. So I had to go back and talk to those physicians and try to understand what kind of messages were they getting from her versus what they were hearing from the project team, and try to get alignment on that. The other piece was I needed clarity on what we missed when we did our assessment. So what are we missing that's causing all of this noise and all of this dust around this project that we thought was a great project and would help, excuse me, help the physicians? What I found that we failed to do, while we said it was the mission of the organization that we were supporting, and the mission was to deliver the best care possible, we failed to explain that in a way that resonated with the medical staff. So using her influence and her reach, she started to create a very uncomfortable situation for the organization. And what I realized was we didn't have the right kind of conversation with the medical staff. So we talked about, oh, we're going to balance load the schedules to make sure that everybody's working on the standard 15-minute schedule. We're going to streamline the patient flow in and out. We're going to make sure the staffing is here. But what they needed to hear were these things. This is what we should have said to them. What if we make sure that we align the right nurses with the right physicians? And let me give an example, okay? We want to make sure that they have a strong team supporting them. So if we have a cardiologist working in a practice, we need a nurse that has experience with cardiology patients, not a pediatric nurse. And vice versa, if we have a pediatrician, we need a pediatric nurse. So we needed to be able to have that kind of conversation. What if we went in and applied Lean 5S, where we standardize your exam rooms, labeled the covers to show where everything should go. So at a glance, a nurse can open the cover before the visit, see what's missing, and fully stock that exam room before you come in. Because in the past, that wasn't done. And so the doctor was always in and out of the room trying to find what he needed to do to complete the visit. One of the other things that we should have said, what if we structure it so that there are medical team meetings that happen at the beginning of the day and after the lunch hour? So you can go through your schedules with your medical team and everybody knows exactly what's needed for those patients. And what if we label the exam rooms so that no matter what building you're practicing in, because now you're a mobile physician, so that no matter what building you're practicing in, you know exactly what exam room you're in. And what if we put up an information board that tells you how many vaccinations that need to be done for the day, how many injections that need to happen. So what if we do all these things to make it easier for you to have that patient visit? That's the conversation that we missed because we were so focused on saying, oh, the patients are going to be so happy, we're going to improve the throughput. But we didn't peel back that onion in a way that the physicians understood it. So that comes down to asking versus telling, right? So we didn't get to that point of the conversations of the what ifs and addressing their needs until I doubled back and started having those conversations to get through all of the noise to understand the foundational concerns. So the foundational concerns were two things: that we're taking control of their schedule and we're telling them you're going to have to complete your visits in 15 or 20 minutes. And the physicians, looking at the way things were done before the project, could not visualize how that was possible. The other thing was forcing them to move to another health center across the organization. So now I'm only working in one now. I'm comfortable. I know where everything is. I trust my care team. Now you're telling me there's a possibility during any given week I have to work across 4 health centers. So we failed to have those conversations to rationalize in their minds what this change is going to do to make their lives easier. So listen, get through the noise, get to what's really happening, find out what messages are being given versus what the project team is sending out, and find a way to balance and level that. So alignment is important. Circle back and talk to the people that they're talking to. And you have to circle back often. Align around the mission. So we all agreed that we wanted to deliver the best patient care possible. So what we made a few changes to put the mission first, patient care first, revenue second. So it does make a difference. And more than anything, it was that asking versus telling. One of the things that I found when I started to engage in the right way, as opposed to what we thought was the right way, was when you go to someone and you ask for them to share their insights, share their thoughts, It makes them feel important. It brings them into the conversation now. So you're not telling them what to do. You're actually inviting them to participate in the conversation and come together to work through the solution. So ask versus tell, and know that you don't always have the answers. Next slide, please. So the impact of the power of one. So there's two phases to this. So there's doing the project. Because Dr. Jane was so good at her alignment, and I have to tell you, as I watched her throughout this process, I honestly thought she went and got change management training. She was an expert at aligning the medical staff to her cause. And she was so good at her campaign. And after observing what I observed in the meetings and how she was controlling the process as we move forward, I realized that we needed to make some changes because all of their concerns were valid and we needed to address them. So I went back to the leadership team and I petitioned them to change the rollout schedule. Now, they would not change the ultimate go live date. So I had to negotiate with them to shuffle the deck, because the most disruptive clinics that was standing behind her and resisting the campaign that we were putting in place were the ones that were the next three on the timeline. So at first, the leadership team did not listen to me. So I had to go back and do some more digging and come back with more data before I got their attention. And they agreed to move those three disruptive health centers to the end. And the ones in the middle, so we moved everything else up. And the ones in the middle were kind of fence sitters. They had not yet desired or decided that they were going to stand firmly behind Dr. Jane. So we had some influence on them. So moving that schedule helped us to continue with the implementation, but it also bought us time to figure out how we were going to deal with these very opposing health centers and deal with the challenges along the way. So we had finally identified the root cause and started to address that. One of the other things that became a really big sticking point, and I've never experienced this before, so this was really new to me, is the word change. It became such a contentious word that the executive team made a pronouncement that the word change management would not be used in any way, shape, or form anymore during the campaign or during the project. The medical center created such an opposition to that word because of them, change was rigid, it was firm, you didn't give me an opportunity to give you my input, I'm not going along with it. So that word just was a catalyst for greater and greater resistance during this implementation. And again, I've never seen anything like it. So we had to go through and scrub all of our updates, all of our literature about the project and remove change. So we landed on transition. And I will tell you what a difference one word makes. So when you're thinking about the literature that you use, explore that with your stakeholders. So before you start to build out all of your campaign materials and everything that you're going to share about the project, talk about those words that can be inflammatory. We never thought that change, the word change, would be as inflammatory as it turned out to be. Once we started using transition, we started to see subtle changes in the environment. So the amount of contention started to die down. And what I learned from this as we went back and started having more conversations with the physicians, I wanted to understand why change was such a terrible word. What we found was using the word transition became more welcoming. So now you're saying we're going through a transition. So this means that it's not being forced on me. I'm interpreting this as now I can participate in the process. So it's easier to absorb the word transition versus change. Lesson learned, never experienced anything like it. So I say all that to say language matters. So as you're building out literature, presentations, and things like that, do a test to make sure that you're not using words that may seem innocent, but may turn out to be very inflammatory. We also paused the project because we realized that moving forward would be detrimental to the organization as a whole. The relationship between the administrators and medical staff had become so fractured that the organization was feeling like there is some significant risk there, because there was the potential that many of the physicians would start to leave. The organization was already under financial distress. They could not afford a mass exodus of their physician body. So what did they do? They paused the project for 6 months, and during that 6 months, the C-suite, our executive leadership team, finally opened the doors and invited the medical staff in. So for 6 weeks, they had meetings with the medical staff to talk through the challenges, to come to terms on what the path forward should look like, align on the objective for the next stage of the project, and work together, develop those action plans to see it and make it happen. So that did a couple of things. It gave the physicians more of a leadership role on the project. So now, rather than just being what we call consultants, they became decision makers. There were no decisions made about the next stages of the project that did not involve clinical insight. The physicians knew better what the patients needed. The administrative understood the numbers. You can't have a one-sided project and expect it to work. So they opened the door, start having those conversations. And let me tell you, you could walk past the conference room during the first weeks of those meetings and people were yelling at each other and banging on the tables. And rightly so, because it took the medical staff months, probably years, to finally get their voice heard. And once they had the audience, they were going to take full advantage of it. And of course, Dr. Jane, was right up front and center, leading the charge. So when you think about that whisper, one individual starting a conversation, having the door slammed in her face. She'd go back and she enlisted the physicians from her health center. The door was shut. Then the word got around, more physicians started to get engaged. Eventually, the whole medical staff stood behind Dr. Jane. What do you think the leadership team is going to do? At that point, they could no longer afford to ignore that voice. So that one voice went from a whisper to a roar. He started a conversation and created a movement with the most powerful employee base in the health center. So that movement ultimately ended with a change in how the leadership structure was designed in the organization. So two key things that came out of that: the leadership finally listened and invited the physicians to the table, and they gave them decision-making authority within the project. So what happened? Now we've got that balance. Now we have that alignment, and we were able to move forward. So I say all of that to say this: that one voice is a powerful voice. So think about the description of the power of one. The influence, persuasion, passion used to manipulate a situation to a desired outcome. She did exactly that. She campaigned and she made it happen. So never underestimate how far a person is willing to go to advance their passion or support their cause, because one person can move a mountain. Next slide, please. So what were the project results? So at the end of the day, we actually achieved exactly what we set out to achieve. We had better alignment with the medical staff and administration. So we were starting to chip away at that us versus them. It did not happen immediately. And actually, it took a few years for that to really happen in earnest and for the physicians to feel like they had decision-making control. And what happened here was, over time, initially the organization was run by administrators, not physicians. They only had one position in the C-suite, and that was the chief of the medical staff. Over time, they transitioned to what they call the dyad leadership for all of the units within the healthcare system. So that meant they had administrative leaders focusing on the administrative side of the house, and they had physician leaders focused on the clinical side of the house. One could not make a decision without engaging the other. So balance, right? Balance and alignment. So the medical staff became more empowered. They had more decision-making. We were able to improve the end-to-end patient experience, whereas the physicians were concerned about their schedules. We demonstrated to them and structured our plan around them. So they had the teams that they need to effectively support them, effectively deliver care within the time constraints that were on their schedule, because everybody knew exactly what they had to do. We did the lean within the health centers to make sure that they were run efficiently. And even with the requirement of them working across multiple health centers, while they were at a different location, we structured the staffing and the support around them such that they didn't feel that they were missing anything. So the physicians were happy. Administration was happy, because not only did we improve that end-to-end patient experience, improve those wait times, more efficient within the health centers, we also increased our revenue, which was also the goal, while maintaining quality of care. In fact, our quality care standards actually went up. So at the end of the day, the physicians were much more happier with the new model, even though they dreaded it at first and they fought it to the end, until we took a step back to clearly explain to them how this change was going to impact them on a day-to-day basis and how it was going to impact how they delivered care. So it was a successful project. It was very difficult to get to that point, and there were a lot of battle scars along the way, but also a lot of lessons learned. So let's move forward and look at some of those key lessons learned. So there were 4 key things that came out of this. Know your audience. So our mistake was overlooking Dr. Jane. We did not understand how powerful she was within this organization. She was well connected, well respected, previous president of the medical staff, knew all the nuances, and she knew how to catalyze the medical staff and get them behind her. So do the work, understand who you're dealing with, understand that circle of influence and who those influencers are. Translate the concerns. Take the time, even though you do your assessments at first up front, take a step back, because you want to make sure that as you're starting to hear more in any project, as you move forward, there's always going to be increasing fears, increasing noise. Some of it is noise, but some of it is information that you need to hear, you need to understand, that may require you to do some sort of pivot as you move forward. So talk to the people that matter, talk to the folks that are concerned, and be that catalyst to help your leadership team understand what those true concerns are. We thought we knew, but we didn't, because we just weren't making that connection. And it was only, excuse me, after we doubled back and talked to some of the people and really peel back that onion, did we understand what those concerns were in a way that we can take it to the executive team and impact how we move forward with the project. Rebuild the trust. So when you're working in an environment with us and them, there's no trust. There's really no trust, especially in an environment that is a healthcare organization where the folks that bring in the income are the physicians, and they don't have decision-making authority around what gets done in the organization. That makes for a very contentious environment. So we laid the foundation, finally, when the executives started to listen, when Dr. Jane had the full medical staff behind her in opposition of what they were trying to do. They opened the doors and finally started to have those conversations. So she started a conversation and created a movement that really changed the direction of the leadership team. And then Turn your opposer into your partner. And this is probably one of the most difficult things to do, but it's also the most rewarding. And what you have to do is find that common ground. So what is the one thing that everybody can agree on? Is it the vision? Is it the mission? Is it the strategy? So think about within your organization, what is the one thing as you're talking to people around the water coolers? Why are they there? What does everybody agree on as the purpose for being there? And then this organization, whether you talk to the lady in the cafeteria, the nurse in the health center, the specialist in the clinic, or the administrator, everybody agreed that we were there for the patient. So that's where we started. And then you want to get to, based on that premise, what are one or two things within that premise that you can agree on? And if you can agree on that with that person, that one voice, then you can start having a conversation and ask them to represent that one thing as a member of the project team. If you can get them to do that one thing, then maybe you can get them to do something else. But you can only get them to do that one thing if you're acknowledging that they bring something to the table and you're bringing them into that conversation. How do you do it? Again, ask, not tell. So those are the key things that came out of this project. And if I had to throw one more out there, is that change is a dirty word, right? So vocabulary and language matters as well. Know your audience, translate the concerns, rebuild the trust, and turn your opposer into your partner. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to open it up to any questions you may have.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brenda. That was such a great session. There was so much good information, actionable advice. I think stuff for everyone to take, something away, put into action in their own organization. By all means, if you have questions, drop them in the chat. We do have, or in the Q&A rather. I mean, if you drop them in the chat, I'll pick it up there as well. We have a couple that have come in before we get to them. Just a minute of a shameless plug for Avaap, Brenda, and a thank you, again, for that great presentation. I want to quickly remind everyone that if you're interested in learning more about how Avaap helps organizations select and implement cloud ERP, optimize their existing technology, do more with their data, or build change capability, you can email Brenda, you can email me, you can email info@avaap.com, and it'll get to one of us. Certainly happy to answer any of your questions and get you connected to the right person. Our next webinar is part of our transformational leadership series geared to higher ed professionals, but it's open to everyone, and regardless of your industry, you're welcome to join us. It's on executive transitions and change, and the connection between proactively planning for change, smooth transitions, and improved business outcomes. So if you've got a new leader, or someone starting a new position, or you're starting a new position, this really is a can't miss session. It'll be on November 16th. I'll make sure everyone on today's call gets information on that. You can also visit the events section of our website, register for yourself. But for now, Brenda, are you ready for a question or two?
I am ready. Fire away.
All right. So this is from someone. And again, if someone wants to take themselves off mute, if I don't do it justice, feel free. But otherwise, here we go. We are about to start a transformative project and have a small group of squabblers and naysayers that I can see are going to derail our change efforts and the change we need so desperately. What are some strategies to truly get people to listen to what I have to say?
So the first thing you have to do is your squabblers and naysayers. What are they saying? So again, go back and listen, right? What is the bone of contention for them? And this may be to the point that I mentioned earlier, while we were talking about the project, we wasn't translating it in a way that they understood. So get to the heart of what it is that they need, and that comes through multiple conversations. So you got to peel back that onion. So bring them into the conversation and do it early. Don't make the mistake we did and say it's noise, because it's not always noise. Amidst the noise is really good information that's going to help you decide how you move forward.
You know, I'm taking away from that, Brenda, the importance of listening and how important it is to listen in your Power of One change efforts. So I like that and I appreciate that. All right. Question number 2. Sorry, trying to go back and forth between the screens. Do you have any tips for creating your own personal influence model so that we can get ahead of any real concerns people have and ensure they're acknowledged or addressed? I know that's a mouthful, Brenda. I'm going to repeat the question, give you a second to organize your thoughts. Do you have any tips for creating your own personal influence model so that we can get ahead of the real concerns people have and ensure that they're acknowledged and addressed?
You know, I love that question because I think of the circle of influence. So, you know, those interconnected circles, there's that really big circle with that one person, that power of one. And then there's all of those little circles that connects to that in some way or another. So start with the water cooler conversations, right? So who is it that's the go-to person for those areas that are going to be impacted? Who's the one person that everybody say, oh, you need to ask John, oh, you need to talk to Tim, you need to talk to Jane. If those are the names that you can continue to hear all the time, talk to those people. Start with them and then start to go out from them. So Jane, you know, so-and-so referred me to you. Who would you refer me to? And they're going to give you the next person. So as you continue to work through that list, start to make those connections. So is Jane connected to Tim, and in what way? Is Tim connected to Susie? In what way? But start at the ground, listen to the grapevine. So you got to approach it 2 ways, bottom up, top down. And remember, it's not always those titled influencers. You got to think about Instagram. Oh, I really like this person. I got 1 million followers. How many followers do they have in your organization? That's what you want to look for.
Brenda, you're going to love this follow-on question. It's almost like you teed it up perfectly for this. But you mentioned this during your presentation, and you mentioned it just now, just a second ago, how non-managers and individual contributors and other influencers play an important role as allies and advocates for change. How do you measure the influence of their actions?
Ooh, that's a good one. I can't give you statistical measurements, but I can go back to the breadth of that influence, right? How many people can they touch? So if you want to look at it from statistics, look at the percentage of your stakeholders that they can touch in one way or another, right? So again, not always the title influence, but think about the breadth and the scope of what they do and the reach that they have within the organization. I hope that answered the question. Melissa, can you give it to me one more time? I want to make sure that I'm hitting it right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, change measurement and management, it's so important, right? The topic of change analytics. I think we're really seeing that a whole lot more, even among our own client base. So the question again is, you mentioned non-managers and individual contributors play an important role as allies and advocates for change. How do you measure the influence of their actions?
Okay, so yes, it's that breadth of their reach, but also is the actions pointed in the right direction? So are they in support of the project? And if they are, how do you engage them in the activities to help the project keep moving forward? And then if they aren't, what do you need to do to bring them back? So again, it gets back to the breadth of that reach. How many stakeholders, what percentage of stakeholders do they have influence over? And what percentage of those activities impacted by the project do they have influence over, good or bad?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you know what? I think we've answered the questions that have come in. You know, again, topic of change analytics, it's super relevant. I think our team is working on a session later in the fall, early winter, covering that as a topic. So again, you know, if you're on our subscription list, you'll get information about our upcoming events. You know, for now, Brenda, you know, we've completed our time together. You've shared such great information with our attendees today. For everybody who took an hour out of their day, We certainly appreciate it. We appreciate the time you spent with Avaap, spent with Brenda, spent with myself. You know, as I mentioned at the start of the hour, there is a survey that'll pop up when we say goodbye here. Please take a minute or two to answer those questions. Part of it is about your experience here today, but other parts of it is, you know, how can we be helpful and deliver more content and sessions that really can help you, you know, do more inside your organizations, more seamlessly navigate change, build your own capabilities, and you know, have great transformation experiences in your organization. So now, Brenda, our attendees today, I hope you all continue to have a great day ahead, good weekend, you know, good success with your change initiatives. And if you need a hand from Avaap, please do get in touch. It's our pleasure to help you. Thanks again, Brenda. Until the next time.
Thank you all. We appreciate you attending.